I'm a speech therapist here at Seattle Therapy Skills for Life, and I'm here to share some information about Gestalt language processing. Gestalt language processing is a form of language development where kids start learning their language through phrases and sentences. These are called gestalts. They're big chunks. And these kids then learn to break them down into smaller parts and finally single words, which they can then recombine into their own messages. Gestalt language processing is a natural form of language development, and it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong or necessarily that they need support. But for a Gestalt language processor who does need support, accurately identifying how they're learning their language helps match speech therapy techniques to that style of language development so that they can progress faster and more successfully. You might hear certain phrases often. These phrases will sound the way they did when your child first heard them. And so you might hear phrases that sound adult-like. You might hear scripts from TV shows or movies. And these phrases always sound the same. So if your child says, "Here you go, buddy," it's always going to sound like that. It'll have 4 words, "Here you go, buddy," the same intonation. You're not going to hear, at least early on, "Here you go, mommy," or "Here you go," or "Go, buddy." It will always sound pretty much the same. You might hear single words amidst longer strings of unintelligible speech. So that might sound like jargon or babble, but if you listen closely, you can hear a word that you recognize. Your child might use rich intonation and they might love music. So Gestalt language processors are keenly attuned to the rhythm and the sound of language, and they use this in their own speech. So you'll hear them use a lot of intonation, like, "Here it is," or "Where are you?" You hear a lot of the up and down and like the really musical pattern in their speech. Your child might have a hard time answering WH questions. This can feel confusing when your child is talking a lot, but they don't answer questions at other times. It might even feel like they're ignoring you, but that's because those WH questions are actually really hard for Gestalt language processors who are early in their learning development. One more sign can be that your child isn't progressing in speech therapy using typical techniques, and that is simply because the style of speech therapy that they're receiving might not match their language style if they haven't been identified as a Gestalt language processor yet. If you think your child might be a Gestalt language processor and you feel that they need support to continue developing their language, find a speech therapist who is a qualified provider who understands Gestalt language processing. This is something you can ask about when you're looking for a provider. Ask them, what do they know about Gestalt language processing, or how does their therapy approach differ for someone who's a Gestalt language processor. There's also great resources online to continue learning, which we'll link at the end of this video. And lastly, stay tuned for our next video where we'll go more in depth on Gestalt language processing.